welcome to Bedtime Story. I hope you're wearing your pajamas. I hope you have your mug of tea. And I hope you are looking forward to chapter 9 of our book, 1984 by George Orwell, which is available on Amazon. If you can't find it on Amazon.com, you should be able to find it on Amazon.uk. To be honest, I think it might even be a bit cheaper on Amazon UK. And as I've mentioned in the past, this book has been edited specifically for people who have English as a second language, and according to the CEFR framework, it's at level B1. And if you don't know what the CEFR framework is, please check out my video on YouTube, which is entitled How Good Is My English? So we are in the futuristic world with Winston, our hero, who is madly in love with Julia, but the government, who control everything, have found out about their love affair, and more to the point, they have found out about them being members of a secret group, not Big Brother, Brotherhood. So they just got arrested. In the previous chapter, we ended on a cliffhanger. They got arrested by the thought police. So we're now going into part 3, which is the final part of the book. Part 3 is called Inside Winston Smith's Head, and we're on chapter 9, Mini Love, which is the Ministry of Love. But if you remember, the Ministry of Love is actually a lot about war and not much about love. So let's begin. Chapter 9, here we go. He didn't know where he was. He thought he was in the Ministry of Love, Mini Love, but he couldn't be certain. He was in a high-ceilinged, windowless cell with white stone walls. It was bright with cold light. In this place, he felt the light would never be turned out. One moment he felt certain that it was a bright day outside, and the next moment he was equally certain that it was black night. We shall meet in a place where there is no dark. That is what O'Brien had said to him. And in the Ministry of Love there were no windows. He thought of O'Brien more often than he thought of Julia. He loved Julia and would not betray her, but he did not think about what was happening to her. Sometimes he thought about what they would do to him. He saw himself on the floor, screaming through broken teeth for them to stop hitting him. Brian must know he was here. O'Brien said the Brotherhood never tried to save its members, but they would send a razor blade if they could, one cut and it would all be finished. In his cell there was a continuous noise from the machine that brought air in from the outside. A narrow shelf went around the wall, stopping only at the door, and at the end opposite the door there was a toilet with no wooden seat. There were 4 telescreens, one on each wall. He was hungry. He might be 24 hours since he had eaten. It might be 36. He still didn't know. Probably never would know if it had been morning or evening when the soldiers took him. Since then, he had been given no food. He sat on the narrow shelf without moving, with his hands crossed on his knees. He had already learned not to move too much. If you moved around, they shouted at you from the telescreen. But he wanted food so badly, especially a piece of bread. He thought perhaps there was a small piece in the pocket of his overalls. His need for the bread grew stronger than the fear when he put his hand in his pocket. "Smith!" shouted a voice from the telescreen. 6079 Smith W. Hands out of pockets in the cells. He crossed his hands on his knee again. There was a sound of marching boots outside. A young officer, black uniformed with an emotionless face, stepped into the cell. He waved to the guards behind him. He brought in a man who they were holding by the arms. It was Ampleforth, the man who rewrote poems for the party. The cell door closed behind him. Ampleforth walked up and down the cell. He had not noticed Winston. He was dirty, wore no shoes, and had not shaved for several days. The hairy half-beard gave him a criminal look that was strange, with his large, weak body and nervous movements. Winston thought quickly he must speak to Ampleforth, even if they shouted at him from the telescreen. It was possible that Ampleforth had the razor blade for him. "Ampleforth," he said. There was no shout from the telescreen. Ampleforth stopped walking up and down. He seemed surprised. He took a moment to recognize Winston. "Oh, Smith," he said. "You too? What are you in for?" Ampleforth put to his head, trying to remember. There is something. We were working on a poem and I didn't change the word God. It was necessary in the poem. There was no other word, so I left it in. I had to leave it in, really. For a moment, he looked happy, pleased with his work on the poem. "Do you know what time of day it is?" asked Winston. Ampleforth looked surprised. "I hadn't thought about it. They took me, could be 2 days ago, perhaps 3. He looked around the cell. "There's no difference between night and day in this place. You can never tell the time." They talked for a few minutes. Then, for no clear reason, a voice from the telescreen told them to be silent. Winston sat quietly, his hands crossed. Ampleforth was too large for the narrow shelf and moved from side to side. Time passed, 20 minutes, an hour. Again there was the sound of boots. Winston's stomach turned to water. Soon, very soon, perhaps now, the boots would come for him. The door opened. The cold-faced young officer stepped in the cell. He waved his arm at Ampleforth. "Room 101, he said. Ampleforth marched out between the guards. He looked a bit worried, but he didn't seem to understand what was happening to him. More time passed. It seemed like a long time to Winston. He had only fixed thoughts. The pain in his stomach, a piece of bread, the blood and the screaming, O'Brien, Julia, the razor blade. Then his stomach turned to water again as he heard the boots outside. The door was opened and a smell of sweat came in through the cold air. Parsons walked into the cell. "You? Here?" Winston cried out in surprise. Parsons didn't seem interested in Winston or surprised to see him. He looked completely without hope. "What are you in for?" said Winston. "Thought crime," said Parsons, almost crying. "They won't shoot me, will they? I mean, they don't shoot you when you haven't done anything. I just thought it was just a thought. And they'll know everything I've ever done for the party, won't they? I'll get just 5 years. Don't you think? Just 5 years, or even 10 years. Someone like me could really help the party in prison. They wouldn't shoot me just for one mistake, a thought." "Are you guilty?" said Winston. "Of course I'm guilty." said Parsons, looking at the telescreen as he spoke. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't guilty. Thought crime is a terrible thing. Do you know how it happened? In my sleep, yes, there I was, working away for the party. I never knew I had any bad stuff in my mind at all. And then I started talking in my sleep. Do you know what I said? I said, down with Big Brother. Do you know what I'm going to say to them? I'm going to say, thank you for saving me. Who told them about you? Said Winston. My little daughter, said Parsons, sad but proud. He walked up and down a few more times, looking hard at the toilet. Excuse me, old man, but I really must go. I can't help it. It's the waiting. I'm so sorry. Parsons took his trousers down. Winston covered his face with his hands. Smith! Shouted the voice from the telescreen. 6079 Smith, uncover your faces. No faces covered in the cells. Winston uncovered his face. Parsons used the toilet loudly and horribly. The cell smelled terrible for hours afterwards. Parsons was taken out. More men and women were brought in and taken out and brought in and taken out by the guards. One woman was sent to room 101 and seemed to become smaller and change colour as she heard the words. Comrade, officer, comrade, officer, she cried. You don't have to take me to that place. Haven't I told you everything already? I'll say anything. Just write it down and I'll say it, but not room 101. Room 101, said the guard. A long time passed. Winston was alone, and he had been alone for hours. Sometimes he thought of O'Brien and the razor blade, but with less and less hope. He also thought less clearly of Julia. He thought that if she were in pain and he could double his own pain to help her, he would. He heard the boots again. O'Brien came in. Winston got to his feet. The shock made him forget the telescreen for the first time in years. They've got you too, he shouted out. They got me a long time ago, said O'Brien with a small smile. He stepped to one side. Behind him there were 3 guards, large with a heavy stick in hand. You knew this, Winston, said O'Brien. You have always known. Yes, he had always known it, but there was no time to think of that. The heavy stick in the guard's hand might hit him anywhere, on his head, his ear, his arm, his elbow. The elbow! They had gone down on the knees, holding the pain in his elbow with his other hand. Oh, there was an explosion of yellow light. The pain was unbelievable, but the guard had only hit him once. They were both looking down at him, and the guard was laughing. Well, one question was answered. You could never, for any reason on earth, wish for more pain. You only wished for one thing, that it would stop. Nothing in the world was as bad as physical pain. With pain there were no heroes. No heroes. He thought again and again as he lay screaming on the floor, holding his useless left arm. So, it seems that our hero Winston is having a pretty tough time inside the prison, which clearly is a place where there is no dark, not because they are enlightened intellectually, but because there are no windows, which means that the lights are permanently on. So that is the place with no dark or darkness. I wish you a good evening, sweet dreams, good night. Ciao.